and welcome to Pittsburgh Now. I'm Chris Moore, the Moore of Pittsburgh. Today we're going to talk to Robert Mazur. He's a former undercover agent and author of The Infiltrator and The Betrayal. This man risked his life to go undercover in the war on drugs and take down many drug cartels, get people convicted, and he has a lot to say about the war on drugs. Are we doing the same thing over and over again? Are we winning? Should drugs be legalized? What tactics should we take to stop international bankers from getting involved in laundering money? What needs to happen to stop the crisis that we're having as fentanyl keeps coming across our borders? People blame China, people blame Mexico, people blame so many things. But we're going to talk to a man who lived the life and actually came close to death and being exposed as an undercover agent. And he got a number of people convicted. We'll talk about all of that and much, much more. I'm Chris Moore. This is Pittsburgh Now. We'll be back with our guest in just a moment. Stay right where you are. Robert Mazur is our guest. He's a former undercover agent who infiltrated the Medellin cartel, bringing Pablo Escobar to heel. We invite him to the program to talk about what needs to be done in the war on drugs, and we have him disguised. The lighting is not bad there. It's just that he is still in danger and does not want his face on camera, and so we respect that. Mr. Mazur, welcome to the program. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, and thanks for inviting me.
All right. You say that in this war on drugs, we keep doing the same thing over and over again, and that's why nothing is getting done. What do you mean?
Well, I think it was Einstein who said that that was insanity, and I think he's right. You know, we must recognize the fact that with respect to the money that's generated from the sale of illegal drugs, it's roughly based on United Nations Drugs on Crime and other very credible sources, $400 billion a year. And on the very best year, the Department of Justice, in its asset forfeitures, cannot claim to seize more than $1 billion. That's 1/4 of 1% of the money generated by these criminal organizations. And that is why today they own nations. We recently, thankfully, extradited the recent past president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, to the United States, now facing drug trafficking charges and life in prison. His brother is in prison for the rest of his life, former senator, and a room full of senators in Honduras. Basically, the cartels are so powerful that they buy nations now, and Honduras was on the chopping block for sale for more than a decade. We really do need to be doing things different than we are.
Well, how do these money launderers do this, and what is the role of international banks, and how does it help the economy of these countries? Do they take their pesos or whatever their money is denominated in, and does any of that money end up in the Federal Reserve Bank?
That's an absolute true story. You know, while I was undercover within the Medellin cartel and I was dealing with corrupt bankers, one of the stories that they told me, I was at a social club with one of them rather late at night in Miami, And he said, you know who the biggest money launderer in the United States is? And I thought, wow, this is great. I'm going to get a great lead. My office is going to be able to pursue. And he said, well, it's the Federal Reserve, of course. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, don't you understand? And this is in the late 80s, early 90s, and it's totally verifiable. It's a true story. The Central Bank of Colombia had what they call the sinister window or the anonymous window. And people who had huge amounts of US dollars could go there and exchange them for Colombian pesos. At the time, it was illegal for any Colombian to have a US dollar account. So periodically, when the central bank in Colombia would get 100 million, 200 million, they would put it on pallets, shrink wrap it, and send it to the Federal Reserve. And his point to me was, don't you think that there's anyone smart enough at the Federal Reserve to scratch their head and go, wait a minute, this is a nation that does not allow its citizens to have US dollars, and they're shipping hundreds of millions of dollars to us at a time. And his point was that it was hypocrisy. I went back undercover the second time in the book that I've now had released, The Betrayal, because I saw just that. I saw that the bank that I dealt with, which was the 7th largest privately held bank in the world, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI, was not an anomaly. They, as the senior executives who were convicted and in prison, as I was part of a debriefing team, basically said, we're not doing anything the rest of the international banking community isn't doing. We didn't learn this and only work for BCCI. We learned these techniques when we worked at other banks, and we thought we were perfecting it at this bank. And I wanted to get as much evidence as I could to show that there's unfortunately a certain segment of the international banking and business community that thrives off of helping people who have money seeking secrecy from governments.
Well, if you knew this and you learned this as an undercover agent, what happened when you brought this information back to the powers that be who had you go undercover? Are they listening to your efforts? Are they listening to what you found out at all?
Well, I think we can look at, I think the quick answer to that is it's a lot like work, and we can't seem to find anybody who wants to do it. But unfortunately, the way we've been treating, the U.S. Department of Justice has been treating banks found to intentionally be involved in the movement of illicit funds to help people to commit crimes, is to fine them. And basically what that is that creates a penalty to the shareholders of the bank. It does nothing to recover the money that is drug proceeds that were there, and it does nothing to hold any individual accountable for what occurred. You know, one of the stories.
Well, let me stop you. Is for them? Is this kind of like getting a traffic ticket? Like for me, I just paid a fine. Is that what it is? It's so small.
I believe that you could make that comparison. Yes. You know, in one of the banks, you can take the story right to Philadelphia. In 2009, I believe it was, Wachovia Bank was found by the U.S. government to be involved in laundering monies for the Mexican cartels, the Sinaloa cartel, and for the Norte de Valle cartel in Colombia. And clearly, the agents that were investigating the case were eager to prosecute individuals who were responsible for that. But what happened was the bank was fined $160 million, and life went on. The bank itself was sold to Wells Fargo, and that was the end of the story. And only a few years later, HSBC was found to be involved in that exact same activity, and they were fined $1.9 billion. Well, you know, that sounds like a lot of money, but to that bank at that time, that was just the cost of doing business.
Wow. Well, that brings me to the question of Al Capone and what he did in taking advantage of laws that prohibited alcohol and what he did in Chicago. Should drugs be legalized here? Would that take the money out of the criminal side of it?
I don't believe so. And what I do believe is that I don't see how we can make methamphetamine and illicit fentanyl on our streets. I don't see how we can do that. You know, we lost 107,000 residents in the United States last year to drug overdoses, and roughly 60% of those were due to fentanyl. I don't believe that the answer is making those types of drugs more readily available. I do believe that there are things on the demand side that we've not been doing, that we need to be doing in order to try to help those people who are, in my opinion, sick, who are using these drugs. Now, yes, we spend minimal amounts of money on making people aware of the evils of taking illicit drugs and provide drug education. And I can tell you we don't provide very much drug treatment. I'm not happy to say this, but I've lost 2 cousins to heroin overdoses, and I almost lost another. And it took me a month to find a bed for him to be able to go to a treatment. And ultimately that didn't work, but he found a faith-based treatment center that did work, that he now works for. I do believe that there are segments of our society in many different cities, people who are underprivileged, underserved, who need real education, need real opportunities to be able to get real jobs and real education. My mom and dad were born in the early 1920s. They've passed. But high school education was free through high school then. Today, education is free through high school now. And I don't understand why it is that those who are underserved and underprivileged shouldn't be able to get a college education or a trade education if that's what they really want. We need to be doing more on the demand side. The money's too big. They're not going to go away. Every time we chop the head off a snake, 2 heads grow. And that's not going to change.
Well, it is. I think you are right. Our demand for drugs that keeps these illicit activities going, and all that money flowing south and into banks and being laundered and the rest. But you talk about real programs and treatment. How much money do you think needs to go into that side of it, and where will that money come from?
Well, you know, you might take a start, and I put this in my book. You might take a start with the $24 billion that was fined on the institutions that were involved in moving criminal proceeds, and move that into a fund so that you can begin to fund education.
Well, where does that money go now?
That money goes back to the Treasury. A lot of it goes back to law enforcement to supplement their budgets.
Well, that's not doing much good. I mean, they've got all the gear. They've been very militarized. They kick in doors and end up shooting the wrong people, like they did in Louisville with Breonna Taylor. I don't know if giving money to law enforcement is the answer.
Yeah, I'm talking about giving that money toward a fund that would enable education for those underserviced and underprivileged, rather than it going into the general treasury or toward supplemental budgets, but for law enforcement. But I also have to say this. In my view, you know, I was a cop for 27 years. I can honestly say that life's a bell curve. It's a bell curve for announcers on TV as it is for law enforcement officers. There are a lot in the middle who are pretty darn good. There are some that are excellent, and there's some that are bad. And 99.99% of the law enforcement officers that I work with work every day, putting their life on the line, trying to do the right thing. Unfortunately, there are some that don't, and I address that in the betrayal. One of my colleagues, imagine this, one of my colleagues that looked at me every single day with a smile, telling me he was my friend, was on the payroll of the Cali cartel, gave them my name, and told them while I was working undercover in Colombia and in Panama that I was a DEA undercover agent.
Well, I'll get in that a little bit later, but I've seen documentaries about Rick Ross and dumping of drugs into L.A. Where police were on the payroll, and I don't know what an officer does when somebody says, here, after a drug bust, here's your share. And this guy is clean, and if he doesn't take it, all the other guys are looking at him, and if he does take it, he's involved, and he's one of those officers that you're talking about. How do the officers resist that?
Well, you know, I can only tell you what I would do if it was offered to me. And that is that there's no way it would go into my hand. And if somebody wanted to try to kill me as a result of that, You know, I'm immediately going to go to the right authorities and do the right thing.
Well, that puts your life in danger.
There's a lot of officers that would do that.
All right, we have to take a break. Robert Mazur is our guest. He is a former undercover agent and author of The Infiltrator and The Betrayal. We'll talk more about his life as an undercover agent in a moment. Stay with us.
I think we need a new dishwasher.
Got it. Oh, that was quick.
All right, you're all set.
Order today, have it tomorrow. Buy more, save more during Don's Appliances Fall Savings Event. Get up to $500 back on your appliance purchase.
I tried to ignore it, but my stomach issues were out of control. I couldn't fix them on my own. It was time to do something. A friend said the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation could help me find a specialist. Feels good to finally have a plan. Don't hide your symptoms. Get help at spillyourguts.org today.
Undercover agent Robert Mazur is our guest. Mr. Mazur, what was life like as an undercover agent? I understand you were living the high life. You had to convince these people you were a high roller. How does the government finance your work to fly on all these private planes and arrive in the big luxury cars?
Well, I was part of an undercover operation that is called an Attorney General's exemption has to be obtained, and that is that the Attorney General, him or herself, has to authorize me to commit certain crimes, which I was authorized to commit, which is money laundering. And there were proceeds that were made as a result of that laundering. And so no taxpayer dollars were used. Matter of fact, there was more in the way of profits of the laundering than there was in expenses in connection with the running of the undercover operation and the prosecution of the cases.
Well, what's it like trying to live that life, though, and not be discovered?
Well, let me tell you, it's for me, I can only tell you what my experience was. I was blessed and I had great leaders and great trainers in undercover schools. I had two brains going at the same time. And a lot of people wonder, like, well, why do you do this? What motivates you to do this type of work? Isn't it dangerous? Well, yeah, it's dangerous. But I felt from the day that I began my career as a law enforcement officer, what really gave me joy in what I did was being part of making a difference. And there was nothing more that, in my view, was being part of making a difference than to be in the trenches. I didn't want to be in management at all. And when I was there and doing this type of work, what really happened for me was information became my heroin. Information about, in 5 or 6 meetings, I got enough information, we'd seize a ton of cocaine. We'd seize $2-3 million. I would get information about where accounts were hidden around the world for people like Manuel Noriega, corrupt leader of Panama, all types of information. And that's really what drove me.
But do you think that all that hard work and danger and life-threatening work went for naught? Look at drugs right now. We're still seizing $1 billion worth of cocaine. People are coming in submarines, speedboats, everything else. The Coast Guard can't stop them. Fentanyl is coming from China and Mexico. And I wonder if you think that all that hard work, even the convictions that you got for Escobar and Noriega and others, went for naught because people just take their place and it goes on unabated.
Well, I don't think it's for naught. And I do believe that what we do now on the supply side, attempting to identify the leaders of these organizations and taking them down, is important because it's just like your sports team. If you lost your quarterback on the Philadelphia Eagles tomorrow,
well, you got the wrong city, but we did do that here in Pittsburgh on the Steelers.
Oh, Pittsburgh. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
But anyway, okay, and yeah, now that you don't have Roethlisberger, but
I understand the analogy. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So the bottom line is that you want to disrupt command and control. And if you don't disrupt command and control and you don't take out these organizations, they do get bigger and bigger and bigger. And yes, I'm afraid to say that it's not going to stop. And you know why? Because when I was a part of the Medellin cartel, it cost $500 to make a kilo and about $2,500 to transport it into the United States. And guess what? That got sold for about $15,000 or $16,000 at wholesale. So $12,000 to $13,000 profit on every widget that you're bringing in. That's going to continue to happen. We do the best we can with the resources we have, but we certainly can't give up. That would be like giving up on your attempt to stop or to try to find a treatment for cancer. I just don't think we should stop. I think we need to continue to try to do that. It is eating away at the morality of our youth.
I think there's no doubt about what you say, but the effort, as I understand what you're saying, has to be two-pronged to go after the drug cartels and then to do something for the people who are strung out on those drugs here to get them off and educate them and get them back into a productive life. Is that right, a two-pronged effort?
Yes, sir. And right now we've got a prong and a quarter of a prong, and we need to put a bigger investment in our youth. There's nothing more important in this nation than our youth.
All right. Tell me about your work in Hollywood and why you came to write The Infiltrator and The Betrayal.
Well, I testified. So much of what happened in the Infiltrator story became public. I mean, I was on the witness stand in one case for 3 months, every single court day. And so I felt as though, yeah, the people in the courtroom knew the story, but the public didn't need to know the story, didn't know the story. And they're the ones I worked for. I worked for the American people when I was a law enforcement officer. And so the investment that they made in my salary, I wanted them to know that I'm just like many, many other public servants who are in law enforcement, who do this type of work, who are very, very motivated to try to do the right thing. And I felt as though that story was extremely important because it revealed the involvement of the international banking community with the Medellin cartel and other criminal organizations. When I went to the bank, it was very, very crazy in Miami, the Latin American division of BCCI, a bank that was the 7th largest privately held bank in the world and a presence in 72 countries. And it was a crossroad for drug traffickers, money launderers, illegal arms dealers, politicians, and intelligence agencies, all of whom were being banked by that organization. We need to put a big light on banks that get involved in handling this type of money, and we need to do more than fine them. We need to put the officers behind bars.
What do you say to the youth of our country about drugs? We have all sorts of DARE programs and others that try to convince young people before they ever get involved in them that they're a good idea. Is that kind of education necessary too? Is it worth it? Is it doing a good job?
I think that education is necessary. I think it needs substantially more funding and support. I think that some of the most effective voices that can be shared with youth are those who made the mistakes and saved themselves and saw death nearly every day because of their addiction. I think those are very powerful voices that can have quite a positive impact on youth. But I think we also, as I say, we can't lose sight of the fact that the youth of today, and especially underserved and underprivileged communities, need better options. They need education to be free. They need access to trade schools. They need much more support than I think what we're providing them now. We have nations. The former president of Honduras was quoted to say that he took joy in enabling all of this cocaine to come into the United States so it could be shoved up the nostrils of the gringos. Some of this is motivated more than just by profit. Some of it is motivated by an effort to try to undermine this nation and the youth of this nation. Sometimes it's difficult for us to wrap our heads around that, but that's the truth.
All right. Back to Hollywood for a second. Lending your expertise to movies that Jamie Foxx or Bryan Cranston may have starred in, does that give the public some kind of dose of reality of what's really happening?
You know, sometimes Hollywood, I think, dramatizes it a little bit too much and makes it makes people who watch it, some who are younger that watch it, maybe be a little bit more attracted to it and aren't really understanding the real truth of it. So, you know, it's a different story between writing a book, a nonfiction book, and trying to tell the truth, and then someone adapting that book into a film. I think that there's a benefit to doing it, but I really, really wish that there was a way for us to make sure that it's not done in such a way that we're making the drug traffickers look like they live an attractive life. All
right, Robert, we got about a minute left. Was there ever a time when you were undercover when you were afraid for your life?
Yeah, there was a time when, and I open up the betrayal, the preface of the betrayal with that scene when I was in Panama in a meeting, and I suspected that the money launderer from Colombia who had come there to meet me knew that I was an undercover agent, but I couldn't let on that I had that suspicion. What I found out later was that he had told 3 people who were in a car downstairs who had AK-47s and other very heavy armor. They were told that if the meeting didn't end by a certain time, they were to come up and kill me and anybody else in the room.
Wow!
And that meeting lasted 3 minutes short of my death. So wow. That's probably the closest call.
All right. Robert Mazur, author of The Betrayal, The Infiltrator, thank you very much. Very enlightening to hear your personal story and what you think needs to be done about drugs. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome, and go Steelers.
All right. Back with one more short thought in just a second.